Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Secure the Bag, but Keep Your Company. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I'm a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that is building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you'll see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So go check out those links and resources in the chat. And a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we'll try our best to get to them all. Awesome. We got Virginia, Georgia, Colorado, Hawaii, New Jersey. Awesome. All across the board. We love it. Thank you for dialing in. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for startups. We are truly humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And before we get started, I'm just going to launch a quick poll to step back and take a temperature gauge on how everyone's doing today. And we use this information to inform the responsive programming that we provide to our community. So let me launch this poll. How are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? Give everyone a few seconds to submit a response. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results. Optimism is in the lead, but we have some feelings of surviving and anxiety. So hopefully our session today will address those feelings in some way. And without further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Leigh-Ann Buchanan, ESQ president at Air Ventures. Thank you so much for joining us, Leigh-Ann. I'll hand you the floor.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Leigh-Ann, as Michelle just mentioned, and I'm super, super excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how to raise money. And most importantly, how to identify and attract non-dilutive or equity-free capital. So are you guys ready to get started? I know I can't hear from you, but if you just want to light up the chat and let me know if you're ready to get started, I'd love to hear it. I'm going to share my screen while you do that. If you can see my screen, just say yep or do a thumbs up in the chat and we'll go from there. So a little bit about me. Hi, I'm Leigh-Ann. You'll be able to learn more about me afterwards because I know we've only got a couple minutes here together to get through a bunch of topics, but long and short of it, I'm a recovering attorney who about 7 years ago found my way into the business world, specifically focusing on social impact. And I never raised any money. And I was leading an organization, and I'm here to tell you a lot of the lessons and tips and tricks and tools that I've learned both from my life as a lawyer, advising businesses as a litigator, and also raising a couple $1 million over the last few years. So thank you so much for being here. I love to use a tool called Menti because I can't bring you all up here to participate live. I love to hear from folks via Menti to make sure we can bring you into the conversation. So if you want to take about 5 seconds, just a bit of an icebreaker before we get into the definition of equity-free capital, what that is, what your stage of business is, and what I have to share with you, I just like to level set and see who's in the room here today. So if you've got your cell phone, I have mine, ignore my cracked screen. Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen, or just go to menti.com and enter the code 52632874. I think Anna was going to go ahead and drop that in the chat for you. And I just want to know, how much equity-free capital have folks here raised? So hopefully you can see the results. The numbers are still climbing, but it looks like, based off of the votes that are in so far, most people are below 100,000. So a couple folks are more than 1 million, about 3 between 100 and 500,000. But the bulk of people who have participated so far, less than 100,000. My hope for you today is, by sharing this capital access blueprint that we're going to walk through, sharing a little bit of my story and some of the strategies, we can move you from that 100,000 range to a little bit more. So you guys ready to keep going? Awesome. Okay. So just to start off, it's really important to, as small business owners, startups, people that are looking to raise money in a leadership role in an organization, categorize your capital. Understand what forms of capital are available to you. So in my background, right now I serve as president at Air Ventures. We're a social impact venture studio. And over the course of the last 7 years, I've raised, I checked this morning, I've raised over $5.6 million and helped to syndicate over $55 million over actually a 1-year period. And we'll talk a little bit about my story in a moment. But understanding what dollars are available to you, how to secure the bag, is the first step. And so before I get into our conversation, I just want to level set. One, dilutive capital, just to define it, is any type of capital. And by capital, we mean dollars, we mean money, we mean checks, we mean wire transfers, anything coming in to fund your business expenses. Dilutive capital is the type of capital that comes from an external resource that has strings attached. Often it takes an ownership percentage. So I have a business right now, I'm 100% owner. If I were to take on extra capital, if it was dilutive, I'd have to give away a percentage of my ownership interest. I would no longer be 100% owner. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment why that may or may not be important to you. But what we're going to focus on today is my favorite type of capital, which is non-dilutive capital, otherwise known as equity-free. Nobody's taking your equity or ownership percentage of your business. You get to retain that. Now, some important considerations that I don't think we're going to get into too much detail, because I highly recommend that if you have to make a decision around external source of capital that's available to you, before you sign on the dotted line, I always say, talk to an attorney, make sure you talk to a business advisor, get a second set of eyes. I'm not your attorney, but find one who can help make sure that you are doing what's in the best interest of your business, where it is right now and where it could be. But some important considerations to think about when you are looking at categorizing capital opportunities is, what is the ownership structure of your business? What is the tax designation of your business? Where is your business located? Some types of opportunities for equity-free capital may have restrictions on them relative to your ownership structure, your tax designation, your geography. Are there any options or conditions? Like, if you make it to X revenue level, does that trigger the ownership percentage going down, trigger a valuation, and generally your financial condition? So for those of you that are here, don't worry, I'm going to share a copy of this presentation. So feel free to just be fully present. You're going to get a copy of this for you to take away and reference. So I love models. My favorite thing is to come up with simple mental models and how to remember strategies or ways to be effective in doing business. And so this capital access blueprint is just 3 simple words that can help guide you in developing a strategy for attracting equity-free capital. 3 words: attract, assess, and align. And what we're going to talk about in the next 30 minutes or so today, as well as hopefully part of the Q&A, is how do we take this blueprint and apply it to your circumstances? When we talk about attract, it's about attracting funding prospects. What do you need to do as an owner, as a founder, as a person to attract funding prospects? And then also, how do you assess your capital readiness? Are you ready to take on investment? Have you crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's? Are there things that you need to know before you go out and make a pitch and ask? And finally, this is probably the most important: align with viable opportunities. Now, let me tell you, it's perfectly okay to say no to money. We're not going to operate from a place of scarcity. It is perfectly okay to say no to money. Not every money opportunity, not every check that comes your way is for you. And so being a smart and aligned business owner, it's really important to make sure that you are only taking on the opportunities that make sense for you, being really intentional about crafting an outcomes-driven approach to capital acquisition. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Paulo Coelho, this is from The Alchemist: when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it. And that's what I hope for you today. So starting off, I think it's important to understand what blocks might exist. Like, what's your why? The questions that I ask to help uncover some of the blocks that might exist around fundraising, because a lot of people often think fundraising is scary. Anybody in the room ever feel kind of nervous or awkward when they're trying to find funding? By just show in the chat, let me know. Yes, yes, yes. I see a lot of yeses. Fundraising is scary. And I'll tell you a little bit about my story, because when I started about 7 years ago, I had not raised a dime. And the idea of fundraising scared me shitless, excuse my language. And so understanding what blocks might be in the way is really about you. Before you go outside and ask for money, you need to understand where you might be standing in your way. And see, these are 4 quick questions or quick considerations that you can do immediately to unblock yourself. So first off, what's your why? Understanding what your why is the critical first step to being able to unlock equity-free capital. We're going to talk about different forms of equity-free capital, but a lot of them are sometimes grants. And people that are giving money away, they're expecting some type of return on impact, not necessarily a return on their investment because you don't have to pay it back, but they want to understand your story. What motivates you? Why are you solving a particular problem? You need to fall in love with your story so you can allow other people to fall in love with your story. Knowing your why and knowing why it's important for you to retain ownership or control is a critical question to ask yourself. And also knowing why you deserve the money you're asking for. You have to believe you deserve it before anybody else can believe it. Secondly, who can provide you with access to the funding? Your network is truly your net worth. A lot of times when it comes to raising money, people are scared to ask folks they know. They don't want to be seen as maybe tarnishing or tainting a relationship, but people want to help people they care about, they trust, and that they're friends with. And so don't be afraid to ask your network to help you with the problem at hand. Tap into your network and don't give into ego or pride that might otherwise prevent you from asking for help. The other thing is what's standing in the way. More often than not, you are standing in the way. When I first had to raise, when I first raised my first $1 million, 6 months before, I knew we were going to run out of cash. We had no funding prospects. And if I didn't raise the money I needed, the organization would fail. And so I actually sat with a friend who is an executive coach. And I said, I don't know how to do this. This is not what I signed up for. I didn't think I would have to raise money of this nature. And she said, what are your limiting beliefs around money? Nobody had ever asked me that before. And I invite you to ask yourself, what are your limiting beliefs around fundraising? Because the minute that I was able to uncover the limiting beliefs that I had and rewire my brain, the money just came. When I tell you, literally within less than 6 months, $1 million single gift of equity-free capital came through the door. It was because I was able to understand what limiting beliefs were standing in the way. And then last but not least, it's really important to do a pre-mortem. Before you embark upon any type of pitch, fundraising activity, ask yourself and ask others to help you think through, how might this go wrong? The more you can anticipate your potential pitfalls, you can see obstacles that might be standing in the way, the more prepared you can be for the road ahead. You're never going to have all answers. You're never going to be in complete control, but you do yourself a disservice by not asking what might go wrong and planning for it ahead. So this is my story. I took a couple minutes in preparing for our conversation today to kind of plot out what my fundraising journey looked like. And this is all equity-free capital over the last few years. And you can see it's not like a straight hockey stick. There are good years and there were bad years. Started pretty low, and then 2018 got $1 million gift, and then used that $1 million gift over a couple of years. So didn't focus as much on fundraising in 2019. We all know what happened in 2020. The pandemic hit. But as you can see, it's still going up. I still managed to clear the $1 million threshold at least 3 years out of the last 7. And some of the high points that I'll share are over 5.6, actually 5.6 million in equity-free capital, helping to syndicate 55 million in philanthropic capital for digital equity initiatives for a project that I have helped to co-lead. 1 million was my single largest operational grant. And then 10 million is the single largest commitment to a specific project or program. All this from someone who really didn't know anything about fundraising. I share this with you to really let you know that it's possible for anybody sitting in this room. If you've never raised any money, if I can do it, I actually believe you can do it too. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. Before we dive into different types of equity-free capital, just go back to Menti for a moment, and I'll make sure to advance to the next question. Just go back to Menti for a moment and let me know what types of equity-free capital let me just advance this. There it goes. Awesome. Name at least one type of equity-free capital. Before we talk about some types that can be helpful to you, I'd love to see what you think is available to you. Just take about 10, 15 seconds. Grants, okay. Anything else? Pitch contests, prizes, GoFundMe, federal grants, economic development loans. If you're not on Menti, just drop it in the chat, but go ahead and put it on Menti so we can see. Own money, I love that. Self-funding, bootstraps, crowdfunding, angel investors, okay, we'll talk about that. Revenue is another one of your own money. Family, especially if you have a generous family and they don't want you to pay it back. Capitalization, okay? So we'll give you, a couple seconds to keep putting your answers in, but the biggest out there, grants. Government grants being a subset of that, but generally grants. That's the one I'm most familiar with. And grants are not just available to nonprofit organizations, but now more than ever, particularly coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot more dollars available for small businesses and entrepreneurs. I see a comment about that angel investment. So typically crowdfunding and angel investments, it will depend on whether or not your crowdfunding is structured as a traditional kind of retail investors crowdfunding campaign under the Jobs Act, which we can get into later, but that would, and plus angel investing, depending on the structures of those deals, they could take equity, or there could be triggers where they're equity free. But we'll talk about, there's 6 that come to mind. Grants being number 1. For those that this is 101. I think it's important that you research resources, map out the available sources of equity-free capital to you. When I was first learning how to raise dollars for the work that I was doing, and that I continued to do, I just mapped out what was available. And that started to help me make an assessment of what types of funding I could attract and what my strategy should be to connect with those sources of funding. So grants, that's funding often for a specific purpose that's not required to be repaid, otherwise known as free money. Loans, that's often debt used for business purposes, including long-term fixed assets or operating capital. And I saw someone mention in the mentee revenue. That's important, but you could also have a line of credit, which is often a fixed dollar amount of credit that could be used at any time. A couple of other ways to look at this is invoice factoring, which is depending on the nature of your business. You could sell overdue accounts receivables to a factoring company that pays invoices less fees and a holdback. And there's also preferred stock. So you could do a stock sale that typically does not affect ownership percentage, but you have to pay dividends. And so that's a payment in lieu of not giving an ownership percentage. So you have to actually be bringing in dollars to pay for those dividends. And then least likely, depending on the stage of your business, is bonds. So you can issue bonds with a fixed rate or floating interest rate that could be secured or not secured by company assets. But the 2 that I think we're going to focus on the most today, which are the most accessible and often have the most opportunities that are untapped for entrepreneurs, particularly at early stages, are grants and loans. Revenue, I know you've got a lot of speakers that can help you think of ways to increase your revenue, but grants and loans are 2 ways to identify sources of equity-free capital. I'll give you one example. This might exist in your city, but an example where I live, I'm based here in Miami, Florida. I know I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, but it's a little bit chilly today. And oftentimes when we're looking for equity-free capital and we're doing our resources, it's really hard to attract what you don't know what's out there. And so for loans and grants, just research. Governments at both the local, state, and federal levels have economic development agencies or small business efforts, which often include grants for emergency purposes or for business development. But you can also look for public and private foundations, both at the local and national level, who may prioritize small business supports or tech startups. I often say financial institutions in particular, who have an incentive to support small businesses who might ultimately become their future customers, they may have programs that provide grants. One that I wanted to point your attention to is just an example from here in Miami. The Miami Foundation, which is our local community foundation, received a $20 million grant from Wells Fargo. And the focus of this grant is to launch something called Miami Open for Business, which is about empowering small businesses to purchase and own critical business assets, including technology, equipment, machinery, inventory, property, pretty much anything a small business could need. You could get free money for something that might be standing in the way of increasing your revenue and improving your business operations. And they really focused on prioritizing historically disadvantaged and underinvested entrepreneurs, which if you fall within a particular class of historically underrepresented founders, there's often a lot of opportunities available to you. Another one that I'll point out is SBIR or STTR. So the SBIR is a Small Business Innovation Research Grant or Small Business Technology Transfer Program. These are federally funded funding opportunities for startups and small businesses across technology areas and markets to meet 3 goals: stimulate technological innovation, meet federal research and development needs, and increase commercialization to transition R&D to impact. A lot of times people, particularly small businesses, those that lean in a really innovative industry or technology, they often forget about SBIR, which is actually powered by the Small Business Administration. But even for a phase 1 grant, which was increased, the ceiling was increased in October of 2022, you can be able to access $50,000 to upwards of $295,000 of a grant to really develop an idea that may leverage federal research or has a unique technological innovation. And then once you complete an SBIR phase 1 grant, you become eligible for, in most circumstances, an SBIR phase 2 grant, which can range from about $750,000 to upwards now of about 1.9 million and change. And so in October 2022, the government reauthorized this particular federal program and actually increased the ceiling for these types of grants. So if you're doing something innovative, you're in the technological space, you are perhaps a researcher that wants to launch a startup, you've always had an idea and you're not tied to an institution, this is a low-hanging fruit avenue to get free money to get your idea off the ground or to validate your particular solution. So long and short of it, when you research resources, don't forget about government and the private and public foundations. Sometimes private foundations may be philanthropic organizations, but also the foundation arms of large corporations. When we think about diverse founders, many large corporations made huge commitments after the murder of George Floyd to expand racial equity. And a lot of that focused on small business opportunities. So there's often a lot of money available for small businesses that they just need to apply for. So I encourage you to do your research and really identify what might be available to you. Next mentee question is, it's about knowing your numbers. Once you've decided the type of equity-free capital that you want, you need to know your numbers and you need to be prepared to show what you're going to do with the money. So I'll advance the slide and I'd love for you to go back to Mentee. And I've identified about 7 or 8 types of financial reports. And I just want to get a sense from the room of how you would rank them in order of importance for securing external funding. So if you're in Mentee, just take about, this one will take more than 5 seconds, take about 20 seconds, 15 to 20 seconds to rank these 7 financial reports or figures in order of importance for securing external funding. We're talking about balance sheet, projection, cash flow, budget, forecast, profit loss, pro forma. Which one is the most important? How would you rank them in ensuring you've got the right order? This is always fun to see how people do this. So let's give it a couple seconds to see this move around. It looks like profit, loss, and projection are in a tight lead. I'll give it about 5 more seconds to see how this moves. It's almost like watching a race. Okay, so keep putting your answers in. There's 21 responses, but 114 people in the room. So because there's a special prize for the winner. It looks like, based off of where we are, folks think that profit loss is the most important. Second, projection, unless it moves as I'm talking, cash flow, budget, balance sheet, forecast, and pro forma. This was a trick question. It does depend on your stage of business, but if you really want to be capital ready, I think it's important to get familiar with all of them. And if your business is up and running and you've got a bit of a track record, at least if you've got a year of a track record, why not work with your advisor to get all of these particular statements together? because they each show something different, and I'll tell you what they are. So profit loss, that's basically the calculation between what you're bringing in and what you're spending and what's left over. It shows profitability, which when, depending on the source of equity-free capital that you're looking for, one of the considerations is what's your ability to repay. So profitability is often an important indicator of your ability to repay. Your balance sheet is looking at kind of assets and liabilities and equities. And so it helps understand your liquidity, or what your cash on hand will look like. What's your liquidity? How much money do you have available? Cash flow statement is what it is. It's what does your cash flow look at over time, which really goes to your ability to repay if you're seeking to take on debt as a form of equity-free capital to fund your business growth or your business kind of startup. So I'd say profit loss, balance sheet, and cash flow statement are just the standard reports that everybody typically has. But when it comes to growth, your budget is the indicator of where you want the business to go. So the budget is an indicator of where you want the business to go. A forecast is a report that demonstrates where the business is going based off of trends. A projection is a hypothetical scenario. What would happen if this? What would happen if that? And a pro forma, I think Ureli's asked, what is a pro forma? A pro forma is a historical statement that's adjusted. It's a historical financial statement that's adjusted for the impact or effect of a future transaction. So you would take what your historical numbers have been, and then you can create an adjustment based off of a future impact or effect of a transaction. Say you want to look at what would it look like if I got that $250,000 of capital infusion? How would that look like? How would that impact my business based off of historical financial statements? So it does depend on the stage of business and the nature of your business, but these are all important reports to have on hand. These are all important numbers to know when you're thinking about getting ready to secure the bag. And so it was a bit of a trick question, but I wanted to take a moment to walk through them. When I first started out, yes, I had practiced law. I had been, working, advising companies. I'd actually been a lawyer who sued accounting firms for audit malpractice for billions of dollars. And so I was generally familiar with financial statements. And what I learned was the more I got into the numbers of my business, the easier it was to articulate how much money I needed, how I was going to spend the money, and most importantly, knowing your numbers engenders confidence often in the folks that are giving you money, whether or not it's a funder for a grant, whether or not it's a loan officer who you're working with to make sure that you can responsibly take on debt. If you know your numbers and you know all of the numbers, not just what is your profitability, that's going to engender confidence and trust. It's going to make it a lot easier for them to vouch for you when it comes to an investment committee and making a final decision to actually deploy capital into your particular business. Another important factor when it comes to securing equity-free capital is understanding what's the value add. So the question that I have for each of you, and this is super open-ended, and I want to get to know who's in the room, is what makes you or your business unique? And I'll tell you why this is a critical question in a moment. So just take about 10 to 15 seconds and jot down through Menti, what makes you or your business unique? Okay. And so we'll let these answers trickle in. What makes you or your business unique? So social impact, that's great. Someone else says impact, human capital, our team's experience. Someone says, I understand the need as I am a directly affected person. That's huge. My creative skills and years of experience in business, impact and strategy, industry perspective or record of execution, my network, creativity, experience, tenacity. Ooh, there's this one right in the middle, financial literacy for marginalized communities, humanizing practices, culture focus. Culture is huge. The personal intersections with customers in unique use of technology. Someone says that they human first at the core. And sometimes we forget that human first is huge. The mission of educating people to understand how our emotions affect their money management. Ooh, that's a good one. Kind of where we started out at the beginning. Consistency in product and customer service, a great solution to a major problem. Differentiated perspective from our competitors on the how. So I want you guys, for those in the room, to keep adding what makes you or your business unique into Menti. And I'll share that sometimes we overlook what makes us special. But when it comes to raising money, your value add is going to be a critical filter in identifying where there may be unique opportunities, capital opportunities for you. So stage of business, if you're an early stage versus a growth stage, there may be unique opportunities to access programs that sometimes come with a check or loans that are only for early stages. Your industry, I think someone said that they have a unique use of technology. Again, the SVIR opportunity that I mentioned a few moments ago was really for technologically innovative solutions. So knowing your industry can sometimes identify industry-specific funding opportunities or grants or even loan programs that you can take advantage of where another founder couldn't. Diversity, this one's huge. I know it might come as a surprise, but I am a Black woman. That is a marginalized and traditionally underrepresented identity. I think Black women entrepreneurs are one of the fastest growing subsets of entrepreneurs in the United States of America right now. There are so many programs that are focused on really supporting groups that have been underrepresented, overlooked, and underestimated by virtue of their diversity. There are grant programs and funding resources for veterans, people with disabilities, people from certain racial and ethnic backgrounds, people with certain gender identities and sexual orientations, different age groups, people re-entering the workforce who have taken some time off. Don't let people make you think your diversity is not your superpower. In fact, your diversity as a founder might be the key to unlocking much more equity-free capital than would have otherwise been available to you. So really tap into understanding what makes you unique and what makes you diverse. And of course, I mentioned innovation. Going back, also understanding your experience. There was a time that I sometimes discounted the fact that I'm a recovering attorney, but I spent 8.5 years practicing law, working on some of the largest cases, fraud, Ponzi schemes, working with financial institutions, litigating, trying cases in court. And when I moved into the social impact space, I kind of said, oh, let me put that on the side. But I encourage you that just because you may have made a pivot in your life or professionally, not to discount your past experience. Sometimes your experiences come with trauma and you want to get as far away from it as possible. But please take every ounce of your experience and knowledge. And even if you're right now in a job and you have a side hustle and you're soon going to move from your full-time to your side hustle, take your experience with you. It is going to be one of your biggest assets going forward as you look to securing capital. So being mindful of time and wanting to make sure that we hear from everyone. These are some of the 6 steps that we've talked through over the last few minutes. But we've got one more thing before we go to Q&A, but I just want to recap them really quickly. Know your numbers. Clarify your financial condition by calculating any projections, shortfalls, and growth rates necessary to secure alternative financing. And also, don't forget to be specific on where new capital infusions will go. Don't try to hide the ball. Say, I need this to do X. I need these dollars to invest and go to market so I can increase my revenue by X percentage. It's important to create feedback loops. Consistently perform pre- and post-mortem exercises. After you have a win or after you have a bit of a setback, refine your strategy and improve your win rate by talking and analyzing and asking for feedback. A lot of times when you get denied, some people just feel defeated and they don't go back to the loan offer to say, why, what happened? What could I do differently? Your feedback loops will help you improve as you keep moving along. Develop a blueprint, just like this capital access blueprint that we talked about. Design a framework for qualifying opportunities that accounts for the time and effort that's going to take from you and the trade-offs associated with fundraising. If you're out raising money, you're not in your business. And so really making the determination about when is appropriate given your stage of business and its needs for the amount of fundraising you're trying to do. Build a pipeline. Research prospective sources of equity free capital through research and referral. So you can research it, but you can also ask people, hey, I'm trying to raise money. Send me anything that comes across your desk. And then importantly, clear the blocks, uncover your limiting beliefs, and get curious about your real why behind diversifying your approach to securing funding. And then also, as we just talked about a moment ago, articulate your value add. Identify and articulate the unique value proposition for your business model, your founding team, or your industry focus. These are 6 strategic approaches that I hope if you apply them will get you one step closer from that sub 100,000 mark that we saw at the beginning in terms of equity free capital through those in the room to closer to the 100 to 500 or over 500 or $1 million mark. And this is my favorite quote that I want to leave you with before we do one more intentional activity, which is that we either live by intention or exist by default. The one thing that I've learned and the one thing that I'd like to impress upon you, if you take away anything from our conversation today, is this doesn't happen by accident. You don't just fall into money, particularly money that you don't have to pay back. Or that doesn't reduce or dilute your ownership interest. It requires intention. It requires you to have clarity, focus, commitment, determination, and a community around you that's there to support you. And so what I want us to do before we transition to Q&A is just learn to hold each other accountable. What is one action you will take towards raising equity-free capital? You could take that action today. You could take it by the end of the week. You could take it by the end of the month. But let's hold each other accountable by just taking at least 15 seconds to drop into Menti. What is one action you will take towards raising equity-free capital? I'll even put my own action in there. Okay. So just take a second and put down in Menti, what is one action that you will take? Someone says, oh, the pressure, I know. It's a lot. What's one action you're going to take? You could take it today. And I didn't mention books, but if you follow me on social, you know I love to read. One book that there's a lot of books that I could probably recommend. And maybe what I'll do is before I share this presentation with the team at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, I'll add in a couple of books that I would recommend to you around raising equity-free capital or raising capital. But Atomic Habits by James Clear may not seem like it relates to raising money, but it's really about making fundraising a habit. It is a stewardship activity that you do daily. Something that I like to do, which is a small micro habit, is I do something called the daily C's. So I reach out to one client, either prospective or existing. I reach out to one contributor, someone that's contributed to my work, just to say thank you and to check in. and then I reach out to one contact, a professional contact. And if you do that, 2 to 3 people every day, 5 days a week, you can take the weekend off. Over the course of time, of daily being a steward of your community and your relationships, you will find that that will transition into opportunities to attract and unlock capital. So for those that, I think Vincent said, please say it again. I call it my daily 3 C's. 1, contributor, someone that's contributed to my work or contributed to anything. 1, client, either prospective or existing, and 1, professional connection. 3 people a day, takes sub 30 minutes. Sometimes it's just a quick text. Sometimes I'll do a handwritten note that I use through the Felt app because I do not like sending mail. Or sometimes it's just a DM on social media. But 3 micro action steps will over time yield better results. And so I love that a lot of you in Mentee said publicly here today what you're going to do to take 1 action towards raising equity free capital. And so here's how to connect with me. And I think, Anna, thank you for dropping it in the chat. And I'd love to just open up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Ann. That was so amazing. I am just going to launch one quick poll before we launch into the Q&A. So this is going to ask you, what is keeping you up at night? And I'll give everyone a quick moment to respond. Awesome. Thanks for participating, everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll, share the results. We got really all across the board, but finance, sales, definitely in the lead. So we will take that into account for our future programming. All right, Leigh-Ann, let's jump into it. So I'm just going to kind of do like a rapid Q&A with you. How does that work?
Sounds good.
All right. So first, as a Canadian corporation, what are your odds, or what is the kind of process that you might go through to access funding in the United States?
It's a good question. I'm actually Canadian, interestingly enough.
Okay.
Little known fact. So oftentimes, and first off, I would say talk to your lawyer or business advisor because that person is not me. And as
Absolutely.
a lawyer, I always give a disclaimer. So one of the groups that I've worked with really closely with is the Canadian Consulate. Here in Miami, our friends at the Canadian Consulate are really helpful in helping startups or businesses that want to expand their operations to the United States really get in contact with the right local, regional, or national opportunities to do so. So if I had a company in Canada, and I actually have friends that do, the first place that I would go is to talk to the consulate, because they have a whole host of network. Like often the consulate will say, hey, Leigh-Ann, here's a company that is pitching or just would like advice or like connections. And as a Canadian living here in the US, I'm always happy to talk with them and make intros. So a lot of consulates have a great network. The second thing is if you are a Canadian or international company that wants to do business here in the United States, look for soft landing programs. We actually, in a prior iteration of our work, we ran soft landing type programs and activities with the startup organizations for Chile and Brazil and the Canadians and other groups, Israelis. So look for soft landing programs that are designed, and they're sometimes at the local or regional level, that are designed to attract new companies and new businesses to a particular region. They're often tied into regional economic development strategies, or they may be housed with co-working spaces or innovation hubs in particular. And a soft landing program for, I think it's Akia Milton who just asked, soft landing programs are just that. They're helping businesses and founders and entrepreneurs get a soft landing. So they may have a lot of programming around doing business in the US as opposed to your country, some cultural kind of connections. What we did with our soft landing is we connected our startups with mentors, with financing, with legal support, just to make sure that they are ready to do business. They need to incorporate, understand the tax implications. All of those things are really helpful. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that was awesome. So many important things to think about, but those are great resources. All right. So, are invoice factoring companies similar or the same as collection agencies? And how do I find out more information about this?
So invoice factoring is super, super niche. So it really depends on the nature of your business. And if you're a business that often operates on kind of like a life cycle of receivables, they are different than collection companies. And there's a lot of tech startups that I think one that I do not endorse particularly, but there's one that I'm familiar with. I think it's called Pipe. But you could do research on invoice factoring companies just online and really understand what is going to be best for you. And if that makes sense, again, if you have a business coach or a mentor or advisor, they'd be a great person to talk to. And if you already are banked with a particular banking organization, I know with the work that we do here in Miami to support our founders at our organization called Opportunity Connect, we work closely with JP Morgan Chase. Their community bankers are there to help advise you or give you feedback or just be a second set of ears on how to make some decisions like invoice factoring for your business.
Love it. Awesome. How can pre-launch businesses find kind of like a database or some way to access a list of grants and loans that, you know, are meant for businesses that serve particular communities, such as certain marginalized communities? Does that exist?
Google. I believe everything exists on the internet. And if you're living in this day and age, like when I was younger, we didn't have the internet. When I was, you know, a child, high school, college, we did have it. And so I just say your first step is often the internet. There are a lot of aggregators. There are a lot of kind of advisors online that will often aggregate these lists. And also your local government Office of Small Business Support often, hopefully, at least they do in Miami-Dade County, will publish a list of grants that are available regularly. And you can sign up for their email list. So our mayor here in Miami-Dade, Daniela Levine Cava, her small business office has something called Strive 305, which has virtual programming for entrepreneurs and small businesses. And then they regularly publish a list of grants. I think they do it once a month or every couple of weeks. And if you get on that listserv, you'll know what opportunities are available by just signing up to those notifications.
Love it. Super helpful. Awesome. And then could you maybe talk a little bit about your personal business journey and how you kind of grew your company, and if you incorporated any of the strategies that you talked about in the session today and how that kind of applied?
Everything I told you, I learned by doing. And I'm telling you because I did it the hard way. And so the organization that I've had the pleasure to lead from kind of when I started it, we had a domain name and maybe some initial promise of funding that I had to work to kind of finalize. And it was really in the social impact space around kind of innovation and entrepreneurship, kind of communities and ecosystem building. But I'm a researcher. So the lawyer never left me, particularly the litigator. And so I just researched. I learned everything by doing. I'm a kinesthetic learner, which means you learn by doing. And so each of these strategies and techniques I learned because I kind of had to figure it out. And I also did a lot of research and had a lot of conversations and asked for advice. And so I share it with you so that hopefully it might shortcut your own journey. But most of my funding has been through grants. And I always say that I'm not a fundraiser, but other people sometimes beg to differ. And I have found that funding comes from having clarity of vision, a track record, a really good track record of high quality execution, and then relationships built on trust. And sometimes when we think about fundraising, we forget that people give money to people they know and trust. Right. And a lot of times represented communities and founders haven't built up the trust or sometimes they lack the access into the high quality networks that can unlock dollars. When it comes to traditional venture capital, I would say, I know the numbers, at least for Black founders, less than 1%, for Black women, less than half a point percent, for Latino founders, less than 1%. So it's challenging for certain marginalized identities to access traditional venture capital. And so looking at alternative resources like grants that are designed particularly for certain communities is often the way to go.
Love it. Awesome. And I think we have time for one last question. So you mentioned the importance of having a lawyer and getting that expertise. So how can businesses who are kind of just starting out access legal resources or that kind of advisor on a low budget? Are there resources that exist for those kinds of businesses?
Yes, there are a lot of resources. And so one of the first places that sometimes people overlook are law schools. A lot of law schools have startup clinics. Here in Miami, University of Miami School of Law, they've got a startup law clinic where they often take on pro bono clients. The other thing to think about, and one of the most important areas when you have your IP, so your intellectual property, is making sure you protect it early. And so the Federal Patent and Trademark Office has programs where they partner with law schools and institutions to provide free legal services around trademark and IP protection. And so just looking to see who's the local organization running that federal initiative so you can get support. And also getting connected with nonprofits that are, or organizations that are doing small business development in communities. We have one here in Miami called Opportunity Connect. We literally connect our founders in opportunity zones with free resources, and we subsidize the cost of getting them small business consultants, legal services. So there's a lot of organizations locally, like even the SBDC, Small Business Development Organization. There's a lot of organizations that have free resources that can help you protect your business and protect your assets. I think sometimes the biggest impediments to that is our own fear or scarcity mindset around asking for help. But I will say the cost of doing nothing is much larger. So just if you have to spend the money, even if it seems like a lot, do it. Or go on a payment plan, or see if you can get on a flat rate startup plan with an attorney, but definitely do your due diligence.
Perfect. Love it. Awesome. And then just to close out, if you could give one key takeaway, something that you want the audience, anything to take away from this, what would that be?
Sure. I see someone from Nifty is here. I think Connie, I love Nifty, great organization. But my takeaway is I think money is just like energy, right? Where your focus goes, the energy flows. And so don't be afraid to think about raising dollars as a function of the energy that you put out there and the energy you put into the effort. Sometimes we get caught in the technicalities, and I know I went through a lot of technicalities. But think about it as energy. It's really about having a goal and then doing the work to achieve it.
I love it. That's such an amazing mindset. Thank you so much for joining us. This was such an insightful session. On behalf of the entire NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone in attendance today, we are sincerely thankful for you joining us. And, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars. You can view the upcoming events by using the link in the chat. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.